Bye.
Okay, so we are starting today in the fifth skandha, Discourse 3, on the descent of Lord Rishabha. So Sri Sukha began again. We had just been talking about the various kings of the continent of Jambudvipa who were appointed by their father. Desirous of obtaining progeny, King Nabhi, along with his wife, Queen Meru Devi, who had no children yet, worshipped with a concentrated mind Lord Vishnu, the deity presiding over sacrifices. The Lord, who is possessed of a charming personality, is difficult to attain, even when the means, such as the materials, place, and time, the prayers, the priests conducting the worship, the fees paid to them, and the procedure are fully employed. Yet, while Nabhi, the reason being, of course, that devotion is the prime ingredient, even if all the rest is present. Yet, while Nabhi was reverently worshipping him with a pure heart, and while the rites known by the name of Pravargya, so the Pravargya Yajna is kind of the introductory part to the Soma Yajna. So while the Pravargya was proceeding, the heart of the Lord was seized with a longing to accomplish the desired object of his servant because of his affection for his devotees. And he revealed before him his most independent, captivating form, which ravished the soul by its limbs, which were pleasing to the mind and eyes. The Lord actually appeared with 2 pairs of arms, was clad in tawny silk, and had the splendid Srivatsa mark on his bosom. He was distinguished by his peerless conch, lotus, wreath of sylvan flowers, discus, the Sudarshana chakra, the Kaustubha gem, his mace, and so on, and adorned with a crown, earrings, bracelets, girdle, necklace, armlets, anklets, and other ornaments of the body, all made of radiant jewels. Seeing the all-effulgent Supreme Person, the priests officiating at the sacrifice, as well as the directors of the sacrifice, and the sacrificer is the Yajamana, basically meaning the person who is the primary sponsor of a yajna, in this case, Raja Nabhi, waited upon him, their heads bent low, with water to wash his hands with, receiving him with the same high regard as penniless people would receive a rich treasure. The priests said, "Be pleased, O most adorable one, to accept again and again the homage offered by us, your servants. We have been taught by worthy souls only to repeat the word Namaha," in reference to you. What man whose mind is engrossed in the phenomenal world, and who is powerless, can hope to determine your essential character with the help of the names and colors and forms of this material universe? You who are the Supreme Lord transcending Prakriti and Purusha. The utmost he can do is to recount a part of your multitudinous excellent virtues, which drive away the sins of all mankind and are most auspicious. On the other hand, O Supreme One, you are propitiated in every way, through worship offered even with prayers lovingly uttered by your servants, in a faltering voice, water, undefiled young leaves, particularly leaves of the holy basil plant, tulsi leaves, and sprouts of panic grass. In other words, very, very minimal offerings. If devotion is there, then just a few drops of water, a few leaves of tulsi is enough. Otherwise, we do not perceive any gain worth the name to you, even through this sacrifice, cumbrous with elaborate details, here inasmuch as you are the very embodiment of the objects of human pursuit, perennially and directly flowing in an abundant degree from your own self, and not conflicting with each other. So dharma, artha, kama, and moksha all together, with kama not interfering with moksha or with dharma, and so on, all in tune. In our case, however, who seek blessing, O Lord, this sacrifice should only prove to be a means of propitiating you. That is why, out of abundant compassion for us, ignorant as we are of our highest good, O Supreme Person, who are greater than the greatest, you have appeared here of your own accord, like one expecting homage, with intent to reveal to us your own glory, known by the name of final beatitude, as well as to bestow our desired blessings, even though you have not yet been properly worshipped, just as a sage would approach ignorant people of his own accord. They're saying this because they were still in the early phases of the yajna. They were going to do this whole Soma yajna, and they haven't even gotten to it. They're just in the introductory part, and Vishnu already appeared. So that's why they're saying you've appeared to bless us, even though you have not yet been properly worshipped. Now that you, the foremost of those who grant boons, have manifested yourself before the eyes of your own devotees at the sacrificial performance of this Rajarishi Nabhi, this itself constitutes a unique benediction, O most adorable one. O Lord, your hosts of virtues are incessantly recounted by sages reveling in the self, who have burnt all their sins with the fire of wisdom fanned by detachment, or fanned by vairagya, I suspect the term is, detachment or dispassion, and who have imbibed your nature, inasmuch as the uttering of your praises is the source of the highest blessings for them. Therefore, while stumbling, sneezing, falling down, and yawning, when placed in a sad plight, and so on, even in fever and while dying, while we are powerless to remember you, let your name, descriptive of your virtues and dispelling our sins, somehow appear on our tongue. Moreover, this Rajarishi, Nabhi, who is desirous of progeny, has resorted to you, competent as you are to grant desired boons, including heaven and even moksha, with the hope of a son like you, and regarding progeny as the object of human pursuit, even as a pauper would approach Kubera, the deva of riches, with the hope of obtaining husk. Who is there on this earth that has not waited on the feet of exalted souls, and who has not been worsted by your invincible and inscrutable Maya, whose understanding has not been clouded by that Maya, and whose understanding has not been clouded by that Maya, and whose nature has not been obscured by the vehemence of poison in the shape of pleasures of sense? Be pleased to ignore, by your undifferentiating outlook towards all, O God of gods, the disrespect shown by us ignorant people to you, the Supreme Deity, in the sense that you, O Lord of unlimited activity, have been duly called here by us who are so stupid as to look upon progeny as the object of human pursuit. So they're apologizing for having called Vishnu just to grant a child, when they are in theory aware that far higher spiritual aspirations exist, and yet that is what their heart wants, or what Nabhi's heart wants, who has employed them. Sri Suka resumed, while he was thus being extolled through a hymn couched in prose, and when those priests, the adored of Raja Nabhi, the ruler of a subdivision of Jambudvipa, bowed at his feet, Lord Vishnu, the foremost of the gods, graciously spoke the following words. The Lord said, O sages, you whose speech is infallible, have asked me the rare boon that a son like me may be born to this Rajarishi. I alone am my compeer, matchless as I am. In other words, there is no son like me unless it's me. Nonetheless, the words of Brahmanas should not prove false either, inasmuch as it is my own mouth that is represented by the Brahmanas. Therefore, not finding my equal, I shall descend through Nabhi, exhibiting a part of my own. In other words, sending an Ansha avatara, or a partial avatar. Sri Suka went on. Having thus addressed the consort of Queen Meru Devi within her hearing, the Lord disappeared. The consort of Queen Meru Devi, of course, being Nabhi, Agnidra's son. Propitiated by Maharshis at that very yajna, O Parikshit, the Lord descended in the gymnasium of King Nabhi, meaning in the family quarters of the palace of King Nabhi, is where he was born, in a divine form, with a view to obliging that monarch and with intent to teach the world the sacred vows observed by sages that have no covering on their body except the atmosphere. In other words, Digambara sages, or sages who wear no clothes, lead an ascetic life and are pledged to perpetual celibacy. Literally, what it says is, and have directed the flow of their generative fluid upwards instead of down and out. Thus ends the third discourse on the descent of Lord Rishabha, forming part of the narrative of King Nabhi, in Book 5 of the great and glorious Bhagavata Purana, otherwise known as the Paramahansa Samhita. Discourse 4 on the sovereignty of Rishabha. Sri Shuka resumed. Now finding marks of divinity, such as the figures of a thunderbolt and a goad in lines on the soles of his feet, manifest in Lord Rishabha from his very birth, in his glory mounting every day, along with the qualities of viewing all alike, control of the internal and external senses, aversion to the pleasures of sense, universal domination and perfection in everything, the ministers as well as the people, including the Brahmanas and gods too, eagerly wished that he should rule over the earth. Considering his personality, which was so exquisite and formed the theme of many a laudatory verse, majesty, strength, splendor, glory, dominating influence, and energy, his father Nabhi gave him the name of Rishabha, meaning the foremost. Envying him, the mighty Indra did not reign in his land. Having come to know this, Lord Rishabhadeva, the master of yoga, laughed heartily and sent down showers throughout his land being known by the name of Ajanabha, by dint of his yoga maya. So Indra withheld rain, so he made his own rain. Having been blessed with a worthy son, as desired by him, King Nabhi, for his part, was overwhelmed with a transport of excessive joy, and felt supremely happy as he fondly caressed the divine child, who was really the most ancient person, having assumed a human semblance of his own will. Addressing him in a faltering voice as, "My child, my darling," his mind deluded by the divine Maya. Having come to know that his son was popular with all, including his ministers and citizens, King Nabhi, who was guided by the popular sentiment, installed him on the throne for the preservation of moral standards and entrusted him to the care of the Brahmanas. Worshipping Lord Vasudeva, as known by the name of Nara and Narayana, through austerities which, though severe, caused no annoyance to others, as well as through the practice of profound meditation, along with his wife Meru Devi, at Vishala. Vishala is in the Badrikashrama Valley, modern Badrinath in modern India. He attained oneness with him at the proper time. People cite the following two couplets in praise of Nabhi, O Parikshit, scion of Pandu. What man can imitate the celebrated doings of the Rajarishi Nabhi, attracted by whose pious deeds Sri Hari became a son to him? Where could be had a devotee of the Brahmanas other than Nabhi, propitiated by whose sacrificial fees the Brahmanas, by dint of sacred hymns, made the Lord of sacrifices manifest himself during the sacrifice? Now indeed, Lord Rishabhadeva, who knew his land to be the land of action, showed how one should live at the residence of one's preceptor, one's guru. Permitted by his gurus, who had received the boons of their choice from him by way of his fees that he paid to them at the end of their instruction, and teaching the duties of householders, he performed both the types of religious rites ordained by the scriptures, meaning those enjoined by the Vedas and those prescribed by traditional law, by which we mean the Dharma Sutras and Dharma Shastras. And he begot through his wife, Jayanti, bestowed on him by Indra. So Jayanti, who he married, is Indra's daughter. In some other Puranas, the story is told in more detail. We're skipping over a whole thing here of how Indra went from being jealous of him and withholding rain to then reconciling with him, and he ended up marrying Indra's daughter. So there's a whole story there, but skipping past that, he is now married to Indra's daughter, the Devi Jayanti, through which he had 100 sons who were his own replicas. Of them, the eldest and the one possessed of the highest attributes was Bharata, who was indeed a great adept in yoga, and after whom they speak of this land as Bharatavarsha, meaning the land of Bharata. Bharatavarsha, when they say this land, it was the region of Jambudvipa in which they lived. It actually encompasses the whole earth that we now live on and more. But since this tradition in our earth was passed down mainly in India, Bharatavarsha often came to also be used as a name for India. And in fact, in most native Indian languages, the word India has never come from India. It's usually still called Bharata or Bharat, as short for Bharatavarsha. Next to him came the 9 brothers, so of the 100 sons, Kushavarta, Ilavarta, Brahmavarta, Malaya, Ketu, Bhadrasena, Indrasprak, Vidarbha, and Kikata, and these 10 led the 90. So these were kind of the foremost of the 100 brothers. Kavi, Hari, Antariksha, Prabuddha, Pippalayana, Avirhotra, Drumila, Chamasa, and Karabhajana. These 9 were eminent devotees of the Lord who taught the conduct prescribed for the votaries of the Lord. In other words, they were like gurus of bhakti yoga. We shall narrate hereafter, in Book 11 of the Bhagavatam, in the form of a dialogue between Vasudeva, the father of Lord Sri Krishna, and the sage Narada, their sacred story, imbued with the Lord's own glory and inducing peace of mind. The remaining 81 sons of Jayanti, who were still younger, were obedient to their father, very modest, highly well-versed in the Vedas, and habitually engaged in performing sacrifices. Purified by their conduct, they passed for Brahmanas, even though they were born Kshatriyas. The Lord, who was called Rishabha, was God himself, independent, eternally free from all evils by his very nature, and enjoying absolute bliss. Yet, performing actions like an ordinary mortal, he taught to the ignorant by his own example the duties that had been forgotten through time, and remaining equipoised, calm and controlled, friendly disposed, and full of compassion. He ordained the people in household life by acquiring religious merit, worldly possessions, and fame, begetting children, enjoying the pleasures of sense, and attaining final beatitude. For generally, the world follows whatever is done by men of topmost rank. Although he himself knew the hidden truths of the Vedas, which represent the essence of all dharmas, he ruled over the people according to the policies of persuasion, etc., following the line of conduct chalked out by the Brahmanas. So this list of the policies gets into some advice for kings given in the Dharma Shastras and the Artha Shastra. He worshipped the Lord according to precept through all yajnas, performed 100 times each, and provided with the proper materials, place, time, age of the sacrificer, faith, and priests, and intended to propitiate different gods. In this land of Bharatavarsha, ruled over by Rishabhadeva, nobody ever sought for one's own use on any account anything whatsoever from another, any more than one would have a thing non-existent, except an incessantly growing and profound love for their ruler, nor did anyone cast a look on another's property. In other words, that there was no theft. Presumably because the land was so prosperous, there was no poverty. On a certain occasion, while touring, Lord Rishabhadeva happened to be in Brahmavarta, which is one of the other regions of Jambudvipa, and there, in a gathering of the foremost Brahmana sages, he thus addressed his own sons, even though they were self-controlled and thoroughly disciplined by virtue of their modesty and excessive devotion, with a view to admonishing them within the hearing of his subjects. So the point is not that his sons need to hear this. The point is that he wants this to be overheard by the other witnesses present for their benefit. Discourse 5, Lord Rishabhadeva instructs his sons and himself takes to the life of an ascetic who has shaken off worldly feeling and obligation. Lord Rishabha began, "This body in the mortal world does not deserve to be given up to sensuous pleasures, which are a source of misery, and which are enjoyed even by swine, dogs, and other animals. It is worthy of being devoted, my beloved sons, to sublime austerities whereby the mind is purified, and from purity of mind follows the unending bliss of absorption into the absolute. The wise speak of service rendered to exalted souls as an open gate to liberation, and the fellowship of those who are fond of women as the door opening into hell." Fond of women, of course, you mean like lusty womanizers, and I think you get the idea. "They alone are great, who are even-minded, exceptionally calm and composed, free from anger, kind-hearted and pious, or again, they who regard love offered to me as the object of human pursuit, who take no delight in men engaged in pursuits calculated to nourish their body, nor in a household consisting of wife, children, and riches, and who have no selfish interest in the world beyond the maintenance of their body. An erring soul commits sin only when he endeavors to gratify his senses. That sensual gratification is ultimately the motivator of harmful actions. I do not regard those actions as good from which has followed this body, which, though non-existent, is yet a source of misery to the jiva. The real nature of the soul remains obscure due to ignorance, only so long as the jiva does not inquire into the truth about the spirit. So long as actions continue to be performed, the mind remains disposed to activity, and it is due to such a mind that the jiva remains tied to a body. The spirit being thus veiled by ignorance, the past actions of a man render his mind prone to activity. And so long as there is no love for me, Lord Vasudeva, the jiva is not rid of its identification with the body. So long as the jiva, oblivious of its real self-interest, does not come to its senses and realize the activity of the indriyas as unreal, it's ironic for the translation to say come to its senses in this context, but come to a true realization. The fool soon forgets its own essential nature, and finding a home providing sexual enjoyment, suffers torments there. The union as husband and wife of a man with a woman, the wise speak of it as another knot binding their hearts together. It is due to this knot that a man erroneously regards a house, fields, children, kinsmen, and wealth as either himself or his own. When the hard knot in the shape of mind, formed in the heart of this jiva by its karmas, gets loose, then does it turn back on this relation of husband and wife, and shedding its ego and freed from all bondage, reaches the supreme. By adoring me and depending on me, the pure self and preceptor, through freedom from thirst for enjoyment, as well as by enduring pairs of opposites, by realizing the fact that a living being is beset with calamities everywhere, through a spirit of inquiry, through asceticism, and by abstaining from actions done with some interested motive, through actions done for my sake, by hearing my stories every day, through the fellowship of those who look upon me as their sole deity, by singing my praises, through even-mindedness, tranquility, and freedom from animosity, through a desire to give up identifying himself with the body, house, etc., through a careful study of scriptures dealing with the spirit, by living in solitude, by thoroughly controlling the breath, the indriyas, and the mind, through faith in saints and the holy books, through continence, through constant vigilance, through control of the tongue, through wisdom illumined with realization and penetrating enough to perceive my presence everywhere, and through deep meditation, my sons, and equipped with firmness, diligence, and discretion, a clever man should tear the veil known by the name of ego. Remaining vigilant, he should completely shake off by this means, as taught by his guru, the bondage in the shape of the knot in the heart, which has been brought about by ignorance and which again is the storehouse where the latencies of karma lie deposited. Then he should desist even from this endeavor. A king, or a father, or a guru, whoever aspires to reach my abode or looks upon my grace as the object of human pursuit, should thus instruct his ignorant subjects, sons or pupils, and should in no case urge them to actions, getting not angry with them, even if they do not listen to him and persist in doing such actions, knowing that they erroneously regard such actions as the only way to their happiness. What object would a man gain by directing a fellow man to such actions? For thereby he would be throwing the blind fellow into the abyss of metempsychosis, meaning the abyss of birth and rebirth. Men who crave for objects of sensuous enjoyment alone, possessed as they are by an inordinate lust for such enjoyment, are themselves blind to their real well-being. That is why they enter into enmity with one another for crumbs of pleasure, and have no idea of the endless misery, deluded as they are. Seeing such foolish men steeped in ignorance, no sensible and compassionate man, who is himself aware of his own real interests, would urge them to resort to such ignorance again, any more than he would direct a blind man who is following the wrong track to continue on that path. A guru is no guru, A relation is no relation. A father is no father. A mother is no mother. A deity is no deity, nor is a husband, who was unable to redeem his pupil, relation, son, votary, or wife, fallen into transmigration. This human semblance of mine cannot be easily understood. Indeed, sattva is my heart, where resides dharma, and adharma has been left far behind by me. That is why worthy souls call me Rishabha. You are sprung from my heart. Therefore, with a mind free from envy, wait upon that brother of yours, Bharata, who is a very noble soul. That will be rendering service to me and taking care of the people. Mobile creatures are higher than plants, which in their turn are by far the best among other created beings, such as minerals and stones, since it's very much a consistent teaching in the Vedas and the Shastras that minerals and stones are alive, and jivas take birth as minerals and stones, but not as evolved and sophisticated as those in plants. And among these, again, mobile creatures, beasts, etc., who are endowed with greater intelligence, are the highest. Higher than these are human beings, while pramattas are higher even than human beings. Pramattas meaning the spirits in the retinue of Rudra, the ghostly Bhutaganas and such who destroyed the Yajna of Daksha, are higher than human beings. Still higher are the Gandharvas. The Siddhas come next, while higher still are the attendants of the gods. Still higher are the Asuras, far higher than humans, interestingly. The gods with Indra as their leader are superior to the Asuras, the Devas are, and still higher rank the mind-born sons of Brahma, Daksha and others, the Prajapatis, the lords of beings. Among these, Lord Shiva, the source of the universe, ranks the foremost, and he, in his turn, is an offspring of Brahma. I am superior to Brahma, while the Brahmanas are worthy of adoration even to me. I place no other living being on a par with the Brahmanas. What creature, then, can I regard as higher than they, O Brahmanas? I eat my fill, the food offered to them by men in liberal quantities with reverence, but not so the oblations poured into the sacred fire at a sacrifice. In other words, he's saying that to him, to Bhagavan, it is more satisfying when food is donated to Brahmins than even than food offered in yajna. It is by the Brahmana that my glorious and eternal body in the form of the Vedas has been maintained on earth, since it is the Brahmanas who maintain the Vedas meticulously. And it is in him that the most sanctifying quality of sattva, control of the mind and the senses, truthfulness and compassion, asceticism, endurance, and wisdom are found. The Brahmanas who are rich in devotion to me, though destitute of worldly possessions, have nothing to seek even from me, the Lord possessed of infinite power and higher than the highest, and the bestower of heavenly bliss and final beatitude. What can they have to do with anything else? With a pure mind, all living beings, mobile as well as immobile, my sons, ought to be respected by you at every step, all as abodes of mine. That alone will be my true worship at your hands, the respect of everything as an abode of the Lord. My propitiation is the reward of the activities of the mind, tongue, eyes, and the other indriyas. For without propitiating me, a man cannot hope to escape from the greatly confounding noose of death. Sri Shuka continued, having thus admonished his sons, who were themselves disciplined for the guidance of the world, the most glorious Lord Rishabha, their greatest friend, installed on the throne the eldest of his 100 sons, Bharata, who was not only a great devotee of the Lord, but was devoted to his servants as well, for the protection of the earth. In order to exemplify the mode of life of recluses, characterized by devotion, self-realization, and aversion for the pleasures of sense, and followed by great ascetics given to self-control and retired from activity, he himself renounced even at home everything except his body, which was the only possession left with him, and having absorbed the sacrificial fires into himself, and taking to the life of a recluse, departed from Brahmavarta as if mad, with disheveled hair and having no covering on his body except the sky. Behaving like a stupid, blind, dumb, deaf, or mad man, or even like a goblin, he put on the appearance of one who had lost all sense of the body, and having taken a vow of silence, remained mute even when accosted by people. In towns and villages, mines and hamlets, flower gardens and habitations at the foot of hills, military encampments and cow pens, in hutments of cowherds, as well as in the midst of caravans, in mountains and forests, hermitages, and other places, wherever he happened to be, he was insulted on every road, even as a wild elephant is assailed by bees, by vile men who threatened and beat him, passed urine on him and spat on him, threw stones, dust, and ordure on him, farted on him, and showered abuses on him. He ignored this, inasmuch as he never looked upon, as his own self or even as his own, this illusory habitat in the shape of a body, called as real by others. Established as he was in his own glory, consisting in the realization of both being and non-being, and roamed about all alone on earth with an undivided mind. Appearing in a form with very soft hands and feet, and chest, long and rounded arms, shoulders, and neck, an attractive face, and other limbs, symmetrically disposed, and a lovely mouth lit up with a spontaneous and naturally captivating smile, he appeared lovely with his reddish and large, refreshing eyes resembling the petals of a fresh-blown lotus. His cheeks, ears, neck, and nostrils were not only beautiful, but uniformly shaped. By the extraordinary gracefulness of his face, adorned with an enigmatic smile, he kindled love in the heart of the women of the city. And with the curly yet matted and auburn luxuriant hair flowing over his face, as well as with his uncared for and unclean body, he looked like one possessed by a demon. When, however, the Lord saw this world directly opposed to his practice of yoga, as it were, and the counteraction of such opposition reprehensible, he adopted the mode of life of a python, meaning remaining fixed to one spot rather than wandering. This is a term in the sannyasi orders, to adopt the mode of life of a python, which is essentially a way of saying not a wandering sannyasi, but one who stays in one spot. And not only ate, drank, and chewed, but also passed urine and stool lying down, rolling in the feces, till all his limbs were thoroughly daubed with it. The wind perfumed with the fragrance of his excrement, indeed surcharged with sweet smell the whole area within a radius of 80 miles. Similarly, living the life of a bull, deer, or crow, he behaved exactly like a bull, deer, or crow, and ate, drank, and passed urine while moving about, standing, sitting, or lying down, just whenever he felt the urge. Thus adopting various modes of life helpful to the practice of yoga, Lord Rishabha, the dispenser of final beatitude, who embodied in himself the constant realization of the highest bliss, was endowed in the fullest measure with all the objects of human pursuit, which were naturally present in him, inasmuch as no veil in the form of a subtle body existed between him and Lord Vasudeva, the soul of all living beings, with whom he was perfectly identified. Of course, it helps if you're a partial avatar to begin with. That is why, O king, he did not welcome at heart the powers of yoga, the siddhis, that actually came to him unsolicited, in the form of the ability to traverse the air, acquiring the swiftness of thought, the power of remaining invisible, and entering a dead body to animate it, the faculty of seeing distant objects and hearing distant sounds, and so on. And thus ends the fifth discourse, forming part of the narrative of Rishabha in Book 5 of the Bhagavata Purana. Discourse 6, Lord Reshabha quits his body. King Parikshit said, "Surely to those who revel in the self and have burnt up the seeds of actions, through wisdom strengthened by the practice of yoga, yogic powers coming unsolicited cannot again prove to be a source of evils." Kind of implying the question, why didn't he not accept them? The sage Shuka replied, "What you have observed is true. But there are some in this world who would never feel quite confident about their fickle mind, any more than a clever hunter would about a deer, which is trapped but not yet dead, however well it seems to be trapped. Similarly, it is said, one should never make friends with the inconstant mind, for as a result of confidence placed in it, the austere vow, maintained for a long period, even of Lord Shiva, was broken. The mind of a yogi who has made friends with it is ever alert to fling the gates open to lust and other enemies that follow him, even as a faithless wife would allow her paramours to enter her husband's house and murder him. What wise man would admit the mind, which is the root of lust, anger, vanity, greed, sorrow, infatuation, fear, and other evils, and which binds a man to his actions? Lord Rishabhadeva was the very ornament of the protectors of the world, the Lokapalas. Yet his divine glory could not be perceived on account of his behaving as aforesaid like a stupid fellow, and because he had adopted the weird appearance, speech, and conduct of one who has renounced all worldly attachments and connections. Now, in order to teach to the yogis the process of giving up the ghost, the process of releasing the jiva from the body, he thought of quitting his body and constantly viewing the Supreme Spirit, who was directly present in him as identical with himself, ceased to think of his body and gave up his identification even with the subtle body. When Lord Rishabhadeva was thus rid of the subtle body, his visible form continued to wander over this globe due to seeming egotism induced by the vestiges of Yoga Maya. In other words, that habits of Maya continued to propel his body to wander in accordance with old habits, even though his consciousness is pretty much entirely removed from it. And visiting as directed by Providence the territories of Konka, Venka, Kutaka, and South Karnataka. So Konka, that's the Konkani coast over on western. It actually starts all the way up in Maharashtra, but it usually refers to the area of the coast of Kerala, the west coast of Kerala on the Arabian Sea, and then basically around various parts of South India here, going across to the east over to Venka, the Venkata Hills, and the south of Karnataka, that area. Traversed the forest of the Kotaka Mountains stark naked like a madman, with disheveled hair and with a piece of stone in his mouth. Meanwhile, a fierce forest conflagration, a forest fire, broke out due to the friction of bamboos tossed about by the force of wind. So wind caused bamboo to rub each other and it started a forest fire. And enveloping the forest on all sides, consumed the body of Rishabhadeva too, along with the forest. On hearing about his ways and imitating them, and deluded by what was destined to happen, a foolish ruler of those territories of Konka, Venka, and Kotaka, Arhat by name, appearing in the Kali Yuga, when unrighteousness will be on the rise, will actually abandon the course of his own duty, which is free from risk in every way, and duly propagate according to his own whims an absurd, wrong, and heretical creed. Led by him and infatuated by the deluding potency of the Lord, many an accursed soul will fall from the standards of personal purity and good conduct enjoined upon them by scriptural ordinance, and adopting of their own free will impious vows constituting an offense against the gods, such as abstaining from bath and achamana, neglecting personal cleanliness and pulling out their hair and so on, will more often than not condemn the Veda, the Brahmanas, Lord Vishnu and his devotees, their judgment being warped by the Kali age, which is dominated by adharma, and assured by their own arbitrary mode of life, which is not supported by the Vedas and which has been indiscriminately followed, they will descend into the dark abyss of hell by their own choice. This descent, this avatarana of the Lord, was intended to give a lesson in the art of liberating oneself to those who are steeped in the quality of rajas. People recite the following verses conformable to the spirit of such teaching. Oh, of all the dvipas and varshas of the earth girt with the 7 oceans, this land, Bharata Varsha, is exceptionally holy inasmuch as the people of this land celebrate the blessed deeds of Lord Vishnu, the slayer of the demon Mura, associated with his avatars. Oh, the race of Priyavrata is resplendent with glory, for descending in this line, Bhagavan Narayana, the most ancient person, the inner controller of all and the cause of all causes, observed sacred vows leading to liberation. Indeed, what yogi, who hankers after the mystic powers of yoga, spurned by Lord Rishabhadeva because of their illusory nature, even though striving to serve him, even though the siddhis came to him to serve him, could even mentally follow in the footsteps of that birthless Lord, much less physically actually do it. In this way has been narrated the sacred story of the Lord bearing the name of Reshabha, the supremely adored of all the Vedas, the various spheres, the gods, the Brahmanas, and the cows. A story which wipes out all the sins of men and is the abode of the highest blessings. Exclusive devotion to the aforesaid Lord Vasudeva is developed in the heart of him who constantly listens to it, as well as of him who regularly recites it, with increasing reverence and with a concentrated mind. Daily and incessantly immersing their soul, burning with the agonies of mundane existence, full of manifold sufferings, in devotion and deriving supreme solace from it, the wise show no preference on any account for final beatitude, for moksha, the highest and everlasting object of human pursuit, even if got without asking, having fully realized their objects in their very devotion to the Lord. Meaning that he's saying that for the wise, they don't care about moksha. Devotion is an end in itself. If it causes moksha, fine. But the point is to have devotion. Rather, the point is the path of devotion rather than the goal to which it may lead. Lord Sri Krishna, the bestower of liberation, dear Parikshit, was surely the protector, guru, deity of worship, beloved friend, and head of the family of your grandfathers as well as of the Yadus, and sometimes your servant too, when he represented you as your ambassador in the court of the Kauravas at Hastinapura. He bestows now and then moksha on those who worship him, but he never, except in very rare cases, grants the boon of loving devotion to his feet. Obeisance to the celebrated Lord Rishabha Deva, who is free from all cravings, rich as he is in the eternal realization of his own self, and who in his compassion revealed the true nature of the self, which is immune from all fear, to men whose mind had long remained oblivious of their welfare, being constantly engrossed in the thought of their body, etc. Thus ends the sixth discourse, forming part of the narrative of Lord Rishabhadeva, in Book 5 of the great and glorious Bhagavata Purana, otherwise known as the Paramahansa Samhita. Yeah, I think that might be a stopping point. Sorry, I know we had a bit of a late start today, so we covered a slightly shorter chunk than usual, but that was kind of a self-contained story of Rishabhadeva, and the next one, the story of Bharata, begins a story that goes on for quite a few discourses. So this feels like a good stopping point in between those two arcs.
Perfect.